Draft Mechanic is a proud member of Punchboard Media. Pull up a chair at punchboardmedia.com. Draft Mechanic, episode 76.
On this episode of Draft Mechanic, we discuss recent plays of Food Truck Champion, Carcassonne the Discovery, and The Mind. We've got a 6-pack review of Altiplano before putting it on tap. Our beer segment is about the types of sour beer, and in our final round, we ask the members of our Slack what the difference is between a story and a game. So sit back, relax, grab a pint, and enjoy the show.
You've seen the future, and it works to take a mile. All is for the best in the best of our world.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Draft Mechanic. I'm Jake.
And I'm Danielle.
And Draft Mechanic is the podcast about board games and craft beer and anything we can do to tie the two together.
Here at Draft Mechanic, we like our beer like we like our board games.
Certainly wild and a little bit funky.
That is the way we like them around here.
Alpaca are wild, right?
I don't think so. I think they're herded, but
Okay.
they
get
are
a little
certainly
funky,
a
though.
little funky.
Yeah, get a little dance. We've also got a segment today about sour beer and all the ways that happens, so that'll be exciting and also kind of funky as well, so that works.
Yeah, we're not necessarily going to be talking as much about the ways that it happens. I know we did talk about the process of souring, I think in our infection beer segment a while back, if you wanted to go back and listen to that. But we are going to be talking about the different types of sour beer, because like pale ales and IPAs and stouts and porters, there are different styles of sour beer, and they mean different things. So we are going to go into that a little bit.
Cool. Well, that'll be a funky discussion. And hey, if this is your first episode of Draft Mechanic, thank you so much for tuning in. And returning listeners, super thanks to you all as well. If you're looking to get in touch with us on the internet, you can go to draftmechanic.net. You can go at Draft Mechanic on your Facebook, social media, Twitter, Instagram, all those usual places. We will be there as well.
If you happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, we have board game nights that are the first Thursday and the third Tuesday of every month. The next one is coming up this coming week. It is June 7th, and it is at Good Road Cider Works, which is down sort of the south half of Charlotte. We'd love to see you come out if you're in the area, play some games, eat some food, have a good time.
Speaking of Good Road, a little bit of a side note, some big congratulations to Good Road, who just won 6 total medals at the Glint Cap, which is the Great Lakes International Cider and Perry Competition, kind of a World Beer Cup or a Great American Beer Festival for cider. They won a gold for their Newtown Pippin single varietal, which is awesome, 2 silver medals, and 3 bronze medals. That's huge. 6 medals from the cidery that we play board games at. I just think that's so awesome. So congratulations, Good Road.
And you can come out to our meetup and try many of those delicious ciders. They are regularly on tap, so it's not like you have one-offs that you're not going to be able to try.
Mm-hmm. So, 2 quick games news announcements. One of them's kind of a little bit older. First off, we have the Choose Your Own Adventure House of Danger, which is a mechanics-enhanced revamp of the classic Choose Your Own Adventure book title. This is apparently coming late summer from Z-Man Games. This is made by the team that made the Bob Ross Art of Chill game, and it is equally as retro in appearance. Do you know the books I'm talking about? The Choose Your Own Adventure books that have the white cover and everything
With
is just
the
kind of rounded
text on them. Yeah, I'm familiar with
everything
those.
in the game looks exactly like that. I was looking at pictures of it, and like there's a track, because in the Choose Your Own Adventure game, you're going to be kind of collecting items and using them and moving up a track, and you have to manage your sanity and safety and all this stuff. But all of the stuff in the game looks exactly like the cover of one of these books. So like it was made in the 70s, which I guess kind of fits the aesthetic since they did the Bob Ross game a little while back.
Yeah, I mean, Bob Ross was a little bit newer than that, but they were certainly true to his whole style and sort of the look of the Bob Ross show, so hopefully they will be able to do a similar job with the Choose Your Own Adventure books. We're also talking about this because it ties into a subject we're going to be talking about later, which is what is a story and what makes that story into a game.
Yeah. So more on that later, and I'm kind of just interested to see what this kind of game looks like and how they're going to actually make this into a more mechanics-heavy kind of game. So that is apparently coming in Q3, which I guess means to me probably Gen Con-ish time, maybe, even some Origins kind of stuff. The other one that was announced that will probably be available at Gen Con through Stronghold Games is Uwe Rosenberg's Spring Meadow. This is the 3rd game in the Polyomino tile laying series. And I was looking at pictures of this online, and it looks like it's got kind of a tile selection mechanic like Cottage Garden, in which you have one central board, and you're going to be moving a specific marker around the outside of it, and depending on what column or row that marker is in is what the row that you're going to be picking from. But it's also got pieces of Indian Summer where you're filling up your personal board, and your goal is to align the pieces in a specific way that you're making groups of holes, because then you get extra tiles. Obviously, you want to get extra tiles because this is a game of filling your board up as quickly as possible so that you can get the most points.
The thing that sort of struck me as different in this game than the other games is that you are going to be scoring points based on how you fill up from the bottom. So you're going to be wanting to fill your board in a specific way, as opposed to the other Tetramino games that Uwe has done, where as long as you efficiently fill up your board, you're going to do well. This one, it is specifically you want to start at the bottom and work your way up from there, being sure to prepare yourself for future scoring rounds as you still try to do well on the current one, which I'm not sure if that is going to be an interesting new challenge or if it's going to be a frustrating new stipulation. And I guess that really is dependent on the rest of the mechanics and how they interwork with that.
Well, I guess the question would be, are you a fan of Tetris or not? Because it seems like a similar kind of thing in that you've got to fill up from the very bottom and your way up, except none of your tiles will disappear. Hopefully your tiles don't disappear, because then you would not score points.
No, but some things actually do disappear in this game. Your board has these marmot holes on it that you can't originally cover, but if you place the hole on the Tetramino piece so that it aligns with the marmot hole, that counts as a cleared burrow, and that gives you a marmot token. But once you win a scoring phase, you have to cover all your cleared burrows. So essentially that type of progress is going away in a Tetris-like way.
I don't know if I like that. I would like to maintain my progress.
There's a lot of marmots in these fields, by the way.
Yeah, well, it's interesting also, and then you kind of see the discussion around this game. People are, I guess, just coming to terms with the fact that this was a trilogy that was planned from the start, because the internet is like, oh man, Uwe Rosenberg just keeps making the same game. While the other half of the internet is like, well, yeah, he told us in the beginning he was going to make this game 3 times and then progress on the system every time. So I am interested to see, after they're done, as it settles, are people going to gravitate towards one more than the other? You know, we were fans of Indian Summer. I didn't really enjoy Cottage Garden too much, and I'm honestly looking at this one like, I don't know how I feel about it yet.
I'm still sort of in the same boat where I'd rather play Patchwork than any of these things. So we could have just stopped there as far as I'm concerned. Indian Summer was good, and I did enjoy it. And just from reading a fairly thorough description of how Spring Meadow is going to work, I'm still leaning towards Indian Summer as being my preference. But who knows? They did say this was the most interactive of the 3. So if that's something that you need in your games, that may be coming with this 3rd release.
Yes, well, I hope if I match a specific set of tiles in the right way, then extra pieces drop down into your Tetris shape area.
I don't think that's how it works.
The joke worked better in my head. Regardless, I'm sure that all of the dust is going to settle, and then we're going to get 3 new versions of Patchwork in the next year or two, and we're going to see how Patchwork Express and Patchwork Extreme, which are names I guarantee I did not just make up,
I forgot you didn't make those up.
No, those are real things. So we will have a minimum of 6 different Tetramino games from the master of Tetraminos, or Polyominoes.
Technically 7 if you count Feast for Odin.
Some kind of Ominos. I don't know. Uwe, what are you doing? I just want to play the games. Let's play some more Patchwork.
Well, let's move on to Kickstarters first. The first one we're going to talk about, I know, is right up your alley because it is a roll and write, and you love a good roll and write.
Oh, yeah. We're talking about On Tour, which is coming from BoardGameTables.com, weirdly enough. The company that did the Duchess game table that actually one of our friends has. Dan has one of these Duchess game tables.
A couple of our friends do.
Now they are publishing a game called On Tour. This is currently funding on Kickstarter. It's at 332% of funding, $67,000 out of the $20,000 goal, so obviously this is getting made. It will be ending on Thursday, June 14th. It has an estimated delivery of January 2019. You can get it for $24 for the base game, or for $48, you can increase it to a 12-player capacity. The base game comes with enough for 4 players to play simultaneously. You can also get like a bulk pledge, which makes sense because they did the same thing with the board game table. A whole bunch of people can go in together, and you can get 8 copies of the base game here. But On Tour is a roll and write game where you are placing tour stops across a map of the U.S. Every turn of the game, somebody's going to roll the 2 dice that will have, they're both D10s, I believe, and you're going to assemble between those 2 numbers whatever you want them to be. Like if one's a 7 and a 3, it can be a 73 or a 37. You're also going to flip over some cards that will tell you where on your map you get to write the number 37 or 73, and you'll get, I think, 2 or 3 cards out that will, show you different regions. And your personal board has a bunch of circles in different states with routes connecting them, and depending on what region the cards show, you can write your 37 or 73 in one of those circles. Your ultimate goal here is at the end of the game, you're going to draw a line from a low number to a high number on your board, connecting stops, basically, because you are a rock band or whatever band, and you are setting up your tour schedule for a 100-day tour. So you have to strategically place sending numbers from maybe west to east or something so that you're able to then come back and trace that particular route.
Now, if this were realistic, there would be no cards that had the Southeast region in that entire deck.
Hey, we get to go see Dessa in a week or two.
That's true.
So we got that. We got that one show going for us. But anyway, the thing that drew me to this, in addition to being a roll and write game, is the component quality is really, really good. This is, instead of pencils and paper, dry erase markers and dry erase boards for each player. And to me, that seems like a really great idea for a roll and write, because that is, on paper, or in a paper roll and write, an expendable component that you have to really worry about.
At the same time, I'm a little bit hesitant, because we've definitely had games that come with dry erase markers where the dry erase markers didn't work when we got the game, or if they did work when we got them, it stopped working a couple of months into owning the game. And with a pencil, I can always go find a pen or a pencil somewhere wherever I am. Mm-hmm. If I'm counting on a dry erase marker working and that marker doesn't work, I'm not playing that game until I can go to the office supply store and buy a new dry erase marker. So there's a little bit of a pro and a con with that.
You're 100% right there. I'm hoping that BoardGameTables.com does a very good job at providing a good quality dry erase marker for us to use.
We'll have to see.
Yes, and that is going for another 2 weeks week and a half? Yeah, week and a half or so. You can go check out On Tour on Kickstarter.
Next up, we have Villagers from Sinister Fish Games. This is funding at 2,950% of their goal. That
is not a typo.
$303,000 of their $10,000 goal. And this is ending on June 13th, with estimated delivery on February of 2019, which, based on the fact that they're at 2,000, almost 3,000% of their goal, I'm going to guess that delivery date may end up getting kicked out a little bit. You can get the game itself for $29 American, or you can get a copy of the game with wooden coins for $40. You can also just buy the wooden coins for $20 if that's a thing you might want to use nice. In a different game. If you don't want villagers, but you really want wooden coins. There has been a ton of stretch goal content added with this. They've got new artwork and greater component quality. The campaign is really blown up like we were talking about, so I'm thinking they're probably going to hit, like I said, a major production delay. But here's hoping maybe they have something in place that it won't get too far out. Mm-hmm. Villagers is an engine building game where you are drafting cards from a market row to create these production chains of villagers. So maybe you start out with a lumberjack, and the lumberjack gives the wood to the the wheeler, and then the wheeler gives it to the cartwright, and you're going to be generating more money when it comes time for the market phase. The longer your production chains are, and the more efficient you are at moving, your base good of wood into a more processed type of commodity. You are going to be taking these villagers into your hand in a drafting phase and then building out a certain number of them based on what villagers you've already added to your village. You're going to keep taking these villagers until 2 specific piles of villager cards are exhausted, and at that point you're going to have a market phase where you're going to get gold, which is also victory points, depending on what chains you've already created. There are also points in the game where you may have to use other players' villagers, and at that point you're going to be placing coins on their villagers that they'll get paid for on those market phases as well. So it is useful to be able to use other players' villagers, but you have to be aware of the fact that you're going to be giving them an advantage down the road. At the end of the game, the player with the most gold is the winner, which is unsurprising because it's the only kind of victory points you have in this game. And that's how you play villagers.
Yeah, it looks like a really neat game. It looks very clean, well-designed. People talking online on the Kickstarter page say it's a lot of fun. More than anything, I'm just concerned about the production and the potential delays in this. Like we said, they've added a lot of stretch goals for new artwork they don't have done yet, upgraded component quality, and 4 or 5 or 6 little mini expansions, some of which aren't even done yet. And all those little things together could really add up to a lot of delay on this. And especially with, Chinese New Year happening in the beginning of the year, I could see this slipping into kind of mid to late summer, finally getting to backers. So if you're fine with that, you can be fine with that.
I don't understand why that's a huge problem. This is not going to be like the talk of the town game of next year. Or it may be very good, but it's not like everybody needs it by a certain point. You'll get it when you get it. And luckily, it does seem to be almost entirely card-based as far as I can tell, other than those wooden coins.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's going to be a huge variety of components that need to be produced on that scaled up production quantity.
Right.
I do think it's kind of interesting the way that these cards work. When you place a villager into your town, it says right on them how many new types of villager that unlocks, and you can't place those other types of villagers without having placed the preceding type of villager that unlocks it. So you do have to be very careful. You can't just take anything that completes a chain. If you want to use a specific type of villager, you need to take the supply chain that allows you to unlock that specific type of villager. So there is a little bit of planning and forethought that goes into creating your village. I think it's kind of neat, and I'm excited to see how it turns out.
Yeah, and we still got a week or so to look at that one if we do want to end up backing it, so plenty of time to really dig into the Let's Plays and all that. There's a lot of video content on their page. They really did their legwork in getting people to preview this game, so that's pretty good for them.
That's probably why they're 3,000% funded.
Very true. All right, well, that is Villagers. You've got till Wednesday, June 13th. Finally, I have Herbaceous Sprouts from Pencil First Games. This one is funding at 266% of its goal right now. That's $53,000 out of the $20,000 goal, and it's going to be ending on June 19th. This has an estimated delivery of May 2019, and you can back it for $35, or you can grab a bundle of Herbaceous Sprouts plus some of the other earlier Pencil First Games titles, including, obviously, Herbaceous, the original card game. You can get Sunset Over Water that we talked about a few episodes ago. It's a neat idea that Pencil First generally does with their Kickstarters. They allow you to get some of those older titles that probably didn't get the distribution or aren't on the shelves as often as you would want them to be, so it's an opportunity to get some of those games.
Not only that, but you've had a chance to hear what people who have gotten to play those games have said about them. I know a lot of the complaints that people have about funding Kickstarters is that they don't actually know how the game is going to fit with their game group or if it's going to be to their taste. So if you can get older Kickstarters on the new Kickstarter campaign, it allows you to pick up the ones that you think you're going to like.
Yeah, so a good opportunity to check out some more Pencil First catalog there. But anyway, Herbaceous Sprouts is a dice drafting game built around the set collection mechanics that you see in the Herbaceous card game. Each turn, you're going to be drafting dice and special action cards to your personal collection. The dice are going to go on your player mat, and those cards are going to give you interesting ways to manipulate your dice or draw extra dice. The dice all have different herbs on them, and then depending on the herbs that you have, you're going to be assigning groups of those herbs to put markers out on this main central board that you have. The central board is split up into 4 different sections of the community garden. There's one set that you get to place a token if you had maybe all herbs of the same type, or maybe different herbs, completely different herbs in this type, or pairs of herbs, and depending on where you get your tokens by the end of the game, you get points from those, because obviously the harder sets to collect are going to earn you more points. I'm a big fan of Herbaceous, the original card game. I like the way the set collection works in it, and I'm always kind of interested to see what people do with the dice game, and thankfully this dice game looked like it adds enough and does the game differently enough to justify having this in the collection as well as the base Herbaceous. So, I mean, this is pretty much an instant back for me. I've been looking forward to this one for a little while.
It does seem a lot lighter than the other dice drafting games that we play a lot of, particularly Sagrada, where that game is set your brain on fire trying to figure out where to put this green too. Herbaceous Sprouts seems a lot more free, and you don't necessarily have such an intense focus on where you're going to assign those dice, which sometimes is nice.
And it's enhanced by the artwork. Beth Sobel, again, did the art for this. It looks fantastic. She did this great giant community garden thing. All of the little tool cards that you get have really nice illustrations. So I'm very excited to see this one when we get it, hopefully, May of next year.
Being very pretty never hurts a game.
Very true. All right, well, that is it for Kickstarters. We're going to take a quick break and come back and talk about some recent plays. Want a second opinion on some of the games we talked about on this episode? Check out some other great content creators at punchboardmedia.com. So starting us off today in recent plays, we have Food Truck Champions, a 2017 release from Daily Magic Games that plays 2 to 5 players in 45 to 75 minutes. This is designed by Nicole Jekic and Luke Turpinen, and the art is by Claire Donaldson. This is a game of multi-use cards, like Matainai, but delicious. And I will say, right up front, that it does contain the food truck that I am most likely to be a part of in my entire life, because it's 2 bearded guys wearing a hat, cooking burgers.
And a lot of French fries, if I remember correctly.
And it's the color red. So it was pretty much guaranteed that I was going to... Anyway, Danielle, tell us about Food Truck Champion.
In Food Truck Champion, you are the owner of a food truck, unsurprisingly. Yay. and you are attempting to complete orders using different ingredients to satisfy not only the orders for the points themselves, but also to satisfy the flavor profile of your truck. You're going to do this by, on your turn, doing one of three things. You're either going to draw some cards or take your owner card into your hand, which are the two simpler actions, or you're going to lead a staff action, which is the main way that you're going to get things done in this game. If you lead a staff action, you're going to take a card from your hand and play it onto your center food truck board for the staff action. Now, all of the cards in this game, other than your starting card and your owner card, have three sections. They have a food order section, which is what you're going to be completing for points. They have a staff section on one of the sides, which is going to allow you to move ingredients or recipes from the center draw piles to your own board. And they have an ingredient section, which is what you're going to be using to put onto the orders to complete them. When you start a staff action, you place one of the cards from your hand so that the staff side is forward, and then everybody else who's playing the game is going to choose to either follow you or not. If they follow you, they're going to get to perform the same type of staff action. If they don't, they're going to get to do one of those other lesser actions that I described when I was saying there were three things you could do. They can draw some cards, or they can take their owner card into their hand. Now, there are some conditions under which they may be able to follow you for free if they've already hired some staff, but predominantly they're going to follow you by playing a card with the same staff action onto their board. Then you're each going to take the staff action. Maybe you draw an ingredient card from the center to put in your fridge to use on orders later. Maybe you take a card to be able to complete the recipe that is on that particular card. Maybe you hire a card from the center into your staff so you can follow additional actions for free or at a higher rate, because if you have hired staff already, you'll get to do the action more times. Or maybe you're going to play ingredients onto your recipe orders from either your fridge or your hand, depending on which staff action you take. Once everybody who is going to follow that action has had a chance to do so, all of the cards that were played to either lead the staff action or to follow it, unless it is an owner card, are going to be placed out in the middle to cover up or fill in spaces that are on that draw row. So the cards that you are playing are actually going to be the cards that you draw from in future rounds. So you have to be tactical about what you put down. If you have, through your staff action, completed a recipe, you're going to take the cards that were ingredients in that recipe and discard them. You'll take the recipe and place it face down in your completed orders pile, and you're going to take a token that represents the number of ingredients that were in that recipe, which are also points at the end of the game. If by taking that token you reveal one of the awards purple tokens on the stacks that you set up at the beginning of the game, you're going to get a chance to move one of your completed orders over to your award area, and if you happen to, by the end of the game, have the icons that are represented on your player board in your awards category, you're going to get additional points at the end of the game. You're going to keep going around, taking actions and following or not following, until two of those stacks of ingredient points are emptied out. At that point, you're going to add up all the points on your tokens, all the points you've received from your awards category, and take a bonus point for every recipe that you've completed that is of your food truck's menu, because each of the recipes has an icon indicating which food truck it should be from. And whoever has the highest total of points is going to be the winner.
Second winner will be if you get the food truck that most represents you as a person.
No, you don't always second winner.
Dang it. Okay, fine.
I do want to start off with a couple of component issues that are really prominent in this game. Mm-hmm. The tokens that you take to mark your board, depending on how many ingredients were in the recipe you completed, are screen printed, and specifically the 2 tokens don't look really legible. They could be 1s, they could be 7s. If you really squint, they can be 2s, but they're not really very legible as 2s.
Yeah, I really see a just kind of a font or typeface choice issue kind of permeating across the whole game, which is frustrating.
I agree, because the names of the recipes are written on the cards above the absolutely gorgeous artwork of each recipe. Mm-hmm. But they are written in a very scrawling script font, and especially since a lot of these recipes are not foods that some of the players may be familiar with. I know one of the food trucks, the one I usually play, is predominantly Filipino cuisine. I am not as familiar with Filipino cuisine as I am with a lot of other types of food. So a lot of times when I'm going to read the card, the fact that the script is very difficult to read makes it even harder to determine what I'm picking up. Not that it actually matters what the name of the recipe is, but it would sort of help the theming if you knew immediately when you picked up the card what it said. So it should have been a more legible font.
I'm actually, now that I'm thinking about it, kind of surprised that recipe cards for different food trucks don't have different fonts at all. The only way you can tell them apart at all is the small icon in one particular corner, and you have to kind of just, okay, is that my food truck icon? Yeah. Like, it's weird to me that my burger truck and your Filipino food truck had the same font for everything, which, again, is, I know it's totally nitpicky and weird, but for a game that you're looking at so many different things on the card, I would really have appreciated more clear pictures and not pictures, but clear iconography, I guess is what I'm saying.
That makes sense. Beyond that, there is one other thing that this game really needed, and everybody that we showed it to immediately was surprised that this game did not have player aid cards.
I don't understand how that's possible.
I also don't understand how it's possible. There are 5 staff actions that I described in the overview that are pretty much the main things you're doing throughout the game, but they are very specific when you're concerning where the cards come from and where they're going. You're already printing however many cards for this game. It's a predominantly card-based game. It would have taken 5 more cards to print player aids that just detailed those 5 actions, because there were a number of times in all of the plays we had of this game where somebody thought that an action allowed them to move a card from either their hand or the center, and it was the opposite. There is, as far as I can tell, not a way to get recipes from your hand into your food truck recipe fulfillment area.
Yeah.
And that was something that people repeatedly tried to do when they took the cashier action, which is what allows you to take recipes. If you had had a little card sitting there saying, hey, no, it's from the center draw to your recipe area, it would have been much more in the forefront of people's minds. And I think it's something that would have been so simple to do, or even just iconography on the cards that,
cashier, mark it to your truck.
Yeah, just a picture of the center area, which would have been 8 rectangles, to the section of the truck. There's no iconography, and the descriptions are only in the rulebook. So if you put the rulebook back in the box, you're going to have remembered them. I think that was a production issue that really should not have been overlooked.
At the very least, they printed those 5 staff actions on the back of the rulebook, but even then, we're passing around this thing, and nobody gets to really kind of plan on their off turn. Oh, okay, well, I have these cards. What do I do? How am I going to do this? It's a weird production issue, and Daily Magic is usually on top of it for these kind of things. All of the Valeria games are really clear, quick, and easy to understand, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, I've not had this problem before, and I think these are just like a few simple things that could have been changed to make the game easier to play.
Yeah.
And I think it's really a shame, because once we got the game going and we figured out how it worked, I really actually did enjoy this game quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it has that kind of multi-use card feel that we hear about from Glory to Rome that we haven't had a chance to play, but also Matainai, kind of a similar thing where you have these cards that are able to do a lot of different things depending on where they are, and it does kind of use your player mat in a similar way, that you're tucking things in special places and moving cards around and stuff like that. But I do really appreciate that it's not 52 different things that I have to figure out. It's just this, 5 different actions that I have to worry about.
I also really enjoy the fact that you always feel like you're able to enhance your position on somebody else's turn. Unless they take one of those 2 sort of lesser main actions to draw cards or to pick up their owner card into their hand, if they perform a staff action, you're going to get to do something. You either are going to get to do the staff action that they're doing, if you follow, or you're going to get to take one of those other actions to draw cards or to pick up your owner card. So at the end of everybody's turn, as long as they've taken a staff action, you've also progressed your position. And that felt fulfilling when I was doing stuff. I didn't feel sort of stuck in the same position.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the inclusion of that owner card, which is basically a wild for a staff action. I just liked having that option, and in a 3-player game it worked out really well. For example, if on the person to my left's turn, when they played, I didn't have something that I could immediately follow, I can still pick up that owner card, and then by the time it was the next player's turn, if, again, I didn't have what it was, I could be playing that owner card again and at least getting some kind of a thing there and not having to wait and build up this ridiculous group of staff cards to be able to take those free actions without playing cards out of my hand.
Yeah, I also liked the balance of trying to get other people to take the staff action you wanted, so that if you had a staff member already, you could follow for free. It's really beneficial if I need somebody to take the driver action and I've already got a driver hired. I want you to take the driver action because then I don't have to spend a card. But you can only delay for so long because when people do take actions, their cards are going out into the center and covering up things you might want. So you don't want to delay so long that the thing that you're hoping to take is no longer available to you, but you want to delay just long enough that somebody else is going to do that action for you. And I think that's an interesting sort of almost a push your luck mechanic, but really more of just a how long am I willing to wait to make somebody else do the thing that I need to do.
I also found it really interesting that since everybody had their own specific food truck, they're looking mainly for the recipes that tie to their food truck. Obviously, an extra point off of a recipe is a good idea. And I found that through that, there was less, I guess, butting heads for ingredients than I expected. It still happened, but I noticed that, or at least it felt like, the recipes that I had were very bread-leaning. For the red food truck, for example. Obviously, the burger and fries guys are going to be using a lot of starch. And I felt like when I looked at other people, they were grabbing, fruits or vegetables, or maybe one truck's going heavy on dairy. And I think that really helps balance the game so it's not as mean as it could be. And I do really appreciate that. Obviously, from time to time, there is the inability for me to get a starch, which is hilarious.
And there are going to be conflicts even if you are predominantly looking for different stuff. Like you said, you were largely looking for grain cards. And while my food truck wasn't all about grain, there were recipes of mine that required grain. And if that was the one that was out when I was taking a cashier action, well, then I'm going to take the one that requires grain, and then we're going to be competing for those grain cards. It wasn't completely isolating when you were trying to make your food truck work, but it wasn't head-to-head over every single card.
I will say, once we got a feel for the way that the game worked, I really enjoyed the gameplay. Just like you said, you get a feel for how the game is going to flow, and I think that's going to be true of a lot of this style multi-use card kind of games. And honestly, it makes me want to go back and try Matainai again now that I feel more kind of comfortable with using that multi-card management. And I'm interested to see if I have a better time with it now that I've played a game like Food Truck Champion, which is like, maybe one step down in complexity.
At least.
3, 5 steps down in complexity. But it gives me more of a stepping stone to get into Matainai, which we played for a few times. I think in like one of the very first episodes of Draft Mechanic, we talked about it. And I feel like I might have a better time understanding how the game works now. So awesome. Glad the Food Truck Champion exists for me.
I mean, it's possible, but I think I'm going to actually stay at Food Truck Champion for a while. I really enjoy a lot of the things that it does, and I'm excited to see how our play styles evolve as we get used to the game.
Cool. All right, well, that is Food Truck Champion.
Next, we got a chance to play Carcassonne the Discovery, which is not Carcassonne the City, which we talked about, I think, in the last episode.
Yep.
Or any other version of Carcassonne. It is Carcassonne the Discovery, a 2005 game from Rio Grande Games, which plays 2 to 5 players in about 30 minutes. It is designed by Leo Colavini, based on the Klaus-Jürgen Werder system, obviously. And the art is done by Stefano Mondini and Fabio Vicentin. This is a Carcassonne tile laying game, so it's got tile laying and meeple placement, but without any of those pesky farmers, because there's discovering to be done, and there's no time to be laying down on the job.
So, Carcassonne the Discovery has the same foundation of most every Carcassonne game. You are going to have a stack of tiles, and those tiles are going to have different terrain features on them. You're going to draw a tile, place it down so that the features match up with other features on the currently placed tiles, and then you're going to have the option to place one of your meeples. In this particular game, there's a few things that are different that are going to affect the way that stuff plays out on the board, and also the way that you're going to be doing your scoring. So I'll just cover those. There's 3 types of features. You have mountains, you have grasslands, and you have ocean. And there will also be sprinkled throughout the grasslands and the mountains these little cities that just are a little picture of a city there. Another significant difference in this game is the way that your followers, which obviously, meeples, are going to work. You actually only have 4 of them, unlike main Carcassonne where you might have 6 or 7 of your meeples in your player color. And in this one, there are a few different ways you're going to be putting them out onto the board. So in most Carcassonne games, you only get a follower that you've placed onto a feature back once that feature is completed. You've finished out all of the boundaries of it, and then you get that follower back, and you score points on it. In Carcassonne the Discovery, you have the option on your turn to either place a follower or recall a follower. This is important because it's kind of a push your luck mechanism almost, in that if you leave your follower out on that feature, it can expand, and once that feature is complete, if you choose to recall it on a later turn, you will get a higher points payout. However, if at the end of the game you have followers on incomplete features, you will get the amount of points that you would get if you had pulled them off earlier. And that's kind of the interesting different thing here, is that at any time, or not any time, but on your turn, you have the option to recall a follower and score a lower amount of points. So, for example, in the mountains, you will score a point for every city that is in the mountains or on a grassland touching the mountains. When a mountain is complete, you get 2 points per city in that particular area. In the grasslands, you get a point for each of the tiles that make up the grassland, and once it's complete, you get 2 points for every tile in the grassland. And then in the oceans, if an ocean is incomplete, then you get 1 point per city that is along the water. But once you complete it, you get a point for every city on the water, plus a point for every square or every tile that is involved in that ocean. So you do have to manage both, I need to have my followers in my supply so I can take advantage of an opportunity, and also I need to be putting followers out onto the board and recalling them when I feel like I'm going to get some points off of that. The game is going to continue, obviously, until you run out of tiles, and then whoever has the most points is going to be the winner. You might notice that there's a follower action that's conspicuously missing from that group, and that's the opportunity to lay a follower down and leave them there till the end of the game to score big points. We see this in base Carcassonne in the fields. In Carcassonne the city, you had the markets. This one doesn't have that at all, which is important because, like I said, you only get 4 followers. And as such, it makes it less of a kind of a turning point where you decide, when am I going to turn to putting my farmers out on the field and lose that meeple forever? And you always have that opportunity to recall meeples, so you're going to be constantly cycling your people in and out. Another thing that I really enjoy about this is that once you pull a meeple up off of a feature, if that feature was incomplete, you always have the option to put a meeple back down in if you place a tile that adds to that feature. I had this happen a few times when we were playing, where I had a grasslands and I pulled somebody up at maybe 5 tiles, and then when that thing was up to 7 tiles, I put another follower down in that particular grassland that eventually got me, I think, 16 points when that field was all complete.
Oh, that's how you got so many points.
Yeah, and it's a different kind of thinking than I'm used to in most Carcassonne games, where you have that tipping point, like I said, of, okay, well, now I really got to double down on these fields so I can get that huge payout of points at the end. You're making a lot more point scoring opportunities of smaller point amounts for the most part in Carcassonne the Discovery.
I also enjoy the fact that when you have placed a follower on a feature, even when that feature is complete, the scoring opportunities for it are not necessarily complete. So if you're playing and somebody finishes off your feature so that you can't add to it any longer, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to be able to get any more points for it. Like you had said earlier, the mountains in particular, you are going to score points for any cities in the mountains and any cities on adjacent grasslands. So if somebody finishes off your mountain feature, you don't necessarily want to take that worker off of the mountains immediately. If there's open adjoining grasslands, you could add more cities and it'll allow yourself to score more points later in the game. It's really only once not only your feature, but the features entirely around it are complete that you are safe to pull that worker off, knowing you're never going to be able to increase the score. And I like that ability to work to make something you've already placed a little bit more valuable.
One other interesting little change is that if you complete a feature that is only 2 tiles big, you don't get the amplified payout from that. And this is good because in base Carcassonne, it's very common that, if you had half a city and you had another half a city in your hand, you could place that down, put your follower on, immediately pull it off, and get 4 points. It allowed you to kind of nickel and diming your points all like that. But you don't get the bigger payout in Carcassonne the Discovery when you do that with 2 pieces of a mountain or 2 pieces of grasslands, for example. And I like that change.
One of the things that did regularly sort of mess up the way I was planning my games was that in regular Carcassonne, scoring something and getting your meeple back is an automatic action. When you complete a feature, you automatically score the points for that feature and you get your meeple back. And I know especially towards the end of our game of Carcassonne the Discovery, I was thinking about, okay, I can add to this feature and place my meeple on it, and I'll get those points. But you don't. You need to be able to spend another turn placing a different tile and pulling that meeple off. And especially as we were getting down to the last 3 or 4 turns of the game, when I knew how many followers I had out, and I knew which ones I wanted to be able to pull back because they were completed features that I wanted to get that additional point for, the factoring of spending a turn to place and spending a turn to pick up was just a little counterintuitive just based on the way regular Carcassonne is. So if you are going to give this a shot, make sure that you are very aware of the fact that placing and recalling are going to each take a turn. They're never going to automatically recall.
Yeah, this had come up because we played Carcassonne the City at Geekway to the West, and I had a copy of Carcassonne the Discovery unpunched that I got from, I guess, a trade table somewhere, and I also have a copy of Carcassonne Over Hill and Dale, which is another one of these standalone kind of Carcassonne spin-offs, again, just unpunched, sitting on the shelf, because Carcassonne is, well, it's the I kind of credit it as being the hobby game that got me really excited about hobby gaming. I love tile placement. I still really like Carcassonne to this day. And playing the city kind of got me excited to check out some of these other variants again. And also at the same time, after this last episode, BJ from Board Game Gumbo had chimed in on our Slack channel, and he just said, Carcassonne the Discovery, I think it's super underrated. Anybody agree? And pretty much silence because nobody seemed to have played this one. And now we have played it, and I can kind of agree. You know what? I think this game is underrated. This is a pretty good variant.
When we were finishing up this game, we were talking about where this fit into the Carcassonneverse for us. I personally think this is a little bit more complicated than your base Carcassonne with no expansions. And I would prefer to play this over base Carcassonne with no expansions. I have a feeling if you had Inns and Cathedrals and Traders and Builders, which are the 2 base Carcassonne expansions that I think are the must play with expansions. If you had those 2 in, I'd prefer to play regular Carcassonne with the expansions. But if you don't have those expansions, I think this is the go-to place to, especially if you're playing with people who are not really familiar with Carcassonne or with board games in general, this is the place to go. I would rather play the city than this, but this is probably going to be a lot cheaper to get a hold of, I would think, than Carcassonne the City.
Yeah, it seems like this one is one that's just kind of exists out there on trade tables the world over, and I'm a little bummed about that. But I will say, this and also the city, and I know I'm probably not going to find one that I love as much as the city, because, oh boy, do I love that version of Carcassonne. But it's really got me excited to start exploring these spin-off titles. So I might be, hitting up the Board Game Geek's trade site to see if I can find some more of these in the future.
For the record, you can buy a used copy of Carcassonne the Discovery for $20 on eBay right now.
Well, there you go. Yeah, that is Carcassonne the Discovery. So maybe next time we'll talk about another one.
Maybe.
Third up in the recent plays, we will, of course, fulfill our contractual obligation to Board Game Media and talk about The Mind.
We are not contractually obligated to talk about this game in any way.
I feel like we're socially contract obligated to talk about The Mind, though. Anyway, this is going to be released 2018 here in the United States from Pandasaurus Games. Plays 2 to 4 players in about 15 minutes if you get lucky and don't die immediately. It's designed by Wolfgang Warsch with art by Oliver Freudenreich. This is a mind-reading card game that... No, you go. Go ahead. Go.
When you're playing The Mind, you're going to start with a deck of cards that is numbered 1 to 100.
47.
The object of the game is to deal out however many cards each player will get for the specific round you're in, and then play the cards in increasing order without talking to each other. That's the whole point of the game.
53.
You need to stop. So in the first round, everybody's going to get 1 card, and they just have to touch their hands to sync up their minds, and then play the cards in increasing order. And really the mechanic of this game is the hesitancy with which you play your card. If I have maybe the 2, I'm going to want to play it a lot quicker than somebody who's holding the 53. And getting the timing down within the group is really how this game is played. Every round you're going to receive an additional card. So in round 3, every player has 3 cards, but they still need to play them in increasing order. If you play a card out of order, you're going to lose a life point for having played a card out of order, but you get to keep going until you run out of life points. When you reach certain levels, depending on how many people are playing this particular game, you're also going to get a token that allows everybody to discard their lowest card, which will give you an idea of what kind of cards everybody's holding, because if I'm holding some cards in the 20s and we discard our lowest card and Jake discards the 73, I know I can play all of my cards without even having to worry about what he's going to play. You only get a certain number of those per game, though, and if you manage to reach, I believe it's the 12th round, but that might just be with 2 players. If you reach whatever round is appropriate for your number of players and still have some life points left, congratulations, you've won the mind. And also, you might have ESP.
The mind.
You need to stop that again.
79.
Sure.
All right. So The Mind is one of these games that everybody in the entire world seems to be talking about on Board Game Media, which is obviously interesting because the game's not over here yet. So
even if people hadn't been very excited about it, which they already were, it is now nominated for a Spiel des Jahres award, which is just going to increase the amount of talking people are doing about it.
Absolutely. And, you know, everywhere at Geekway people are playing this game, and it really is as simple as a deck of 100 cards. And I understand why people are super excited about it, because it is a different feeling kind of game in that, you know, you're not doing anything, you're not communicating in any way, and you have to just know when to put your cards down. And it does feel different. I don't think it's going to be that exciting for a very long time, but that's particularly just me.
I think the idea of using hesitancy as a mechanic is really interesting. The problem I have with this game is that I don't like mind-ready games. I've said that a ton of times on this podcast and many, many more times not on this podcast. But the entire point of the mind is to be able to understand what the other person is thinking. And if that's the kind of thing you enjoy, if like trying to figure out whether they're waiting because they're counting slower than you or they're waiting because they think that you have something lower than their card is really interesting to you and you're excited to do that, this game is dead simple and easy to teach and really easy to carry around. It's just not for me.
Yeah, I will say, whenever I have played The Mind, there is 1 or 2 moments in the game where you get, like, the 2 back-to-back cards, or maybe one person's just got all their cards are in the top 20, you know, 80 and above, and everybody's looking at them like, what's going on over here? And for that, it's fun. It's fun, and I feel like this is the kind of thing that if you have the deck of 100 cards, it's easy enough to throw in your bag that it's going to come out at every game night between games as people are waiting for Game A to wind down or Game B to get started. It's such a quick and easy thing to play that I can understand why people are playing it a whole ton. I'm really kind of surprised. I mean, I guess I'm not surprised because people like to talk about the thing that was hard to get, but the fact that this game is being talked about so much for not even being available here in the US for another few months, even despite the Spiel des Jahres nominee, it's kind of like with the game itself that came out last year. People were very, very, very excited about the game until it got over here, and then everybody played it and like, okay, cool, well, we did that now. And I'm wondering if we're going to see a similar thing happen with The Mind here, and I feel like it's going to come down to whether or not it wins a Spiel.
I mean, the game is very much the analog here, right? Because it's a similar component set. You've got a bunch of cards which are numbered in sequential order, and it's all about communicating without actually saying. In the game, you are supposed to play the cards in increasing or decreasing order, allowing you to jump based on sets of 10, and there's a lot of communication you need to do, but you can never say the number of the card you actually have. You are allowed to talk a little bit, though, and I think the fact that you need to have a dialogue without actually being specific, I think, is what makes that game interesting to me. I think there's a little bit more culpability when you screw it up. Like, you talked about it, and you can feel like, oh, this is where we had an error in our discussion, and, you know, sometimes in that game, you're just forced to play something because of the number of cards you need to play every round. And it doesn't necessarily feel like, oh, I didn't read your mind right. Which, with The Mind, if you lose, it's just because you didn't guess right. I mean, there is obviously a little bit more to it. Once you get to the higher levels, you developed a group dynamic. I think of the two, every time I'd rather play the game, but that has largely to do with my play style, We'll have to see if this ends up winning the award, because the game was nominated but didn't win the Spiel des Jahres a couple of years ago, so maybe if The Mind wins, it will suffer a different fate.
Well, we will find out in a few months the fate of The Mind. 99.
100.
As a Viking leader, I know all there is to know about runes and taking direction from the constellations. I'm not so sure about closing some weird portal, but I'm aces at taking the advantage in combat with a fearsome monster to get what I want.
In Rising 5, Runes of Asteros, you and your game group will work together to manipulate the 7-colored rune tiles to find the correct arrangement of 4 that will allow you to close the rune gate and save the planet. You'll need to take on encounters to gain the energy needed to check your arrangement and to acquire artifacts and hints to help you solve the puzzle. But watch out, if you take too long or allow too many monsters to go unvanquished, your group will find nothing but failure.
The blood moon rises once again.
The puzzle and your attempts are managed by a slick app that means all players will get to be in on the action.
A what?
So check out Rising 5, Runes of Asteros, and all the other great Grey Fox games at greyfoxgames.com. Grey Fox Games, quality games, cleverly crafted. So our 6-pack review this week is one that we sort of alluded to in our Geekway episode, last episode. We said that we had a couple of games that we wanted to do full reviews of, and one of them was Altiplano. This is a 2017 release from DLP Games and Renegade Games Studios that plays 2 to 5 players in purportedly 60 to 120 minutes. The designer is Rainer Stockhausen, and the artists are Clemens Franz, Andrea Katnig, and Jeff Oglesby. This is a game of bag building, resource management, and turning 2 fish into a cairn.
Altiplano is a bag-building game, kind of like its older sibling, Orleans, also by Rainer Stockhausen, in which you are going to be collecting these little cardboard chits that are different kinds of resources that you're going to put into your cloth bag. Kind of like a deck builder, you're going to be amassing more and more of these over time, and hopefully getting ones that will allow you to build an efficient engine that, as you draw a specific number of tokens out of your bag, you can assign them to the action spaces you most need, and then generate more resources, or get, different contract cards, so on and so forth. Each player is going to have their own personal action board. They're all the same for every player, and they're split up into several different areas. The areas on your action board are going to correspond to a set of tiles that is in the center of your table that are different locations around the area that you are doing all of your work in. Each of the locations also stores one of the specific tiles of goods, which is important for end-of-game stuff. On your turn, you're going to draw a specific number of tiles out of your bag and fill a planning area at the bottom of your action board. How many tiles you are allowed to have is dictated by your position on one particular of these tiles we call the road, and depending on where you are on that road, you're going to be either filling up to 4 all the way up to 8 of these tiles. One of the actions you're going to take through the game will obviously allow you to increase yourself on that track, so you're able to draw out more tiles and hopefully take more actions. After everybody has drawn out the amount that they need, you're going to simultaneously plan out where you want those particular resource discs to go on your action board. Each of those spaces has a different set of actions that you can take depending on what goods you put in. For example, up in the alpaca fields, the alpaca fields, if you put down just an alpaca, you can get food. If you put down an alpaca and food, you can get some wool. If you put down wool and food, you can spin that into a blanket. And anytime you take actions, you are not going to be losing those tiles. The tiles that you placed to activate those actions are going to go into a little container you have, and any new tiles that you generate will also go into the container. As you go through drawing stuff out of your bag, when you go to draw from your bag and you have nothing to pull out, you're going to dump your container back in, kind of like shuffling your deck in a deck builder. And as in any kind of deck builder or bag builder, as the game goes on, you're going to get more and more of these resource tiles. And maybe there will come a point where you have so many resource tiles that you have to go through 5-6 pulls out of your bag before you start getting the stuff you want. Altiplano also has kind of a culling mechanic in that you have a second board, which is your warehouse, and it basically is a set of shelves. You have 5 shelves that are 3 spaces wide, and then you have another set of shelves that are 4 spaces wide. And if you go up to a specific location on your action board, you can throw some tiles into your warehouse, removing them from circulation, and eventually at the end of the game, hopefully scoring you some points. As you complete out rows fully in your warehouse, you'll get a bonus on whatever particular row it is, depending on how high up you have stacked your goods in that particular warehouse. You can only have one type of good per row. You have to start at the bottom and work your way up. You don't have to complete a row to move on to the next row, but you must have all of the same kind of good on one row until it is finished. There's obviously an asterisk that we won't discuss here in this description. The other kind of catch with this game is that as you want to take actions in different locations, you're going to have to work your worker meeple around to those locations in that center set of tiles. Everybody starts with one cart, which allows you to take a movement action of 1 to 3 spaces for free. Basically, that enables you to get anywhere from anywhere, since you can go either way in the circle of that particular set of location tiles. You may also assign some of the food action tiles to other movement spaces and spend 1 food into your container to take your meeple 1 space to the left or right from the tile that it's on. As you go on in the game further, you have the ability to buy more carts up to a maximum of 4. The carts are activated with a food tile, just like regular movement, but they again enable you to move 1 to 3 spaces, basically enabling you to get anywhere. And all of these different things that you can get, the different resources, the different actions you can get, are going to be up to you how you want to use them. There's also a set of contract cards that you can purchase a contract and then cull some of your tokens out onto those contracts for big endgame points. There's a space you can go to get additional extensions for your board that will latch onto one of your regions, enabling you to get more efficient usage or maybe some different ways for you to manipulate your chits. There's also cards that you can purchase to get additional endgame scoring. Maybe you get an extra point for everything of this particular tile. There's a set of cards that you can purchase from that give you a good of your choice, which is great because some of the goods are very hard to come by unless you have a specific production chain set up. All of this is going to end in totaling up a whole bunch of points on the thankfully included score sheets at the end, because you're going to get points for all sorts of things. You're going to get points for the different kind of goods chits that you have in your bag and your container and your warehouse. You're going to get points for the different contract cards you fulfilled. You're going to get points for the house cards you've built and the boat cards you've purchased. You're going to get points for having points, basically. It's one of those kind of games. But that's a pretty good foundation on how the game is going to work. You're going to continue playing up until either all of the extension tiles run out on that particular track, or if one of the location tiles is completely exhausted of resource tokens, cards, and if it is the one with the carts as well. Basically, once any of those things run out, you're going to complete that round and then do one final round, and then whoever has the most points is the alpaca. Is the winner.
You mean the llama?
No, we're going to specifically say alpaca.
Okay.
We're going to try real hard to only say alpaca.
I would not be surprised if we don't succeed at least once.
All right, so in typical six-pack review first, I feel like we need to start with components, artwork, that kind of stuff. Game looks fine. It's Clemens Franz artwork. And I feel like we talked about this last time in Clans of Caledonia. If you know Clemens Franz artwork, you're going to get Clemens Franz artwork. I'm
going to put an asterisk on this, though.
Okay.
Because I don't generally love Clemens Franz artwork. It's very good quality, but it's not generally my taste. Mm-hmm. I think I figured out with this game that I just don't like the way he draws people. He draws alpacas fabulously. And all of the goods are fine. I'm very happy with it. I guess I just don't like the way he draws people. Mm-hmm. But the art is really nice, and I think all of the coloring is really nice. It's distinct in every way. I'm never looking at a chit going, which one is that? Is that fish or is that pointy rocks? Which is a mix-up that is not out of the question in this game. But I don't have a problem with any of the resources distinguishing them. All of the extensions are fairly clear, with the exception of maybe one where you know what the extension is going to do. But all of them have a glossary in the back so you can look them up. I think the production, at least graphically and artwork-wise, is very good.
Yeah, it's actually, I didn't really think about that, but while I say, yeah, it's Clemens Franz artwork, this is way brighter than most of his, dour gentlemen staring on a cover kind of people in a farm with, handfuls of wheat kind of stuff. It's very colorful. This is a very colorful game, and I think a lot of that is just kind of bleed over from the cover, which is one of the brightest box covers of this year so far, I think.
Now I get to be the downer as far as components go.
Alrighty.
What is essentially your discard box, where you're throwing any chits that you have used or are purchasing, is a box that you fold up together, and it's got little teeth on the corners, and it's supposed to stay together. Problem is, after about 4 games on our copy, None of the boxes stay together. I ended up taking broccoli rubber bands and rubber banding them together, and you can very easily do that, and they'll stay together very nicely and function.
Those are rubber bands for broccoli, not of broccoli, just to clarify.
Anybody who's bought broccoli knows what they are. But the boxes don't stay together. I know one of the folks that we played a lot of our games of this with just wasn't even trying to put his together by the end. He was just stacking stuff on top of the flattened box.
This is my bowl.
The llama has some similar...
there it is. The alpaca.
First player alpaca, who looks surprisingly like Cusco from The Emperor's New Groove, but who is a llama, by the way. But the first player alpaca is 3 pieces. It's the body and then the 2 sets of legs. He will fall apart very quickly on you, unless you are very careful moving him from player to player every round. I think in the last 2-player game we were playing, we just took the legs off and we're passing the center of the alpaca back and forth.
Yo, throw me the torso.
Yeah, that's weird. The other thing that was a little less than ideal about this game is the bags that you are pulling all of your chits out of so that you can place them on your planning area are a sort of cottony, fairly low quality, it seems, bag. Mm-hmm. Every time I reached into my bag, there were more black threads that were coming out attached to everything. I know for a while I was worried. I was like, if they blow away, is the cat going to eat them? And get all kinds of thread all up in himself. But they are going to be kind of a mess every time you're trying to pull stuff out. And I also had a little bit of trouble feeling whether the bag was actually empty. I don't know if there's much of a way to fix that, but that was something that I repeatedly thought my bag was empty and then felt into the corner and I was like, oh, there's another chit in here I didn't see.
Surprise.
Which could be a problem if you're waiting for something to come out and you just missed the corner of it to pull it out. I don't know, maybe if the bags were rounded, that wouldn't happen. Yeah,
I feel like this is the kind of game that a trip to the craft hobby store might be a good idea for, at least to just, I'm sure you can get a handful of bags at a decent cost and get, maybe even get player color bags, something like that.
That would be nice.
Yeah, so that's an option, perhaps. Talking about rulebook was fine. I thought it had a very good reference for the different extensions and the different mission cards, which we never got. There's a little mini expansion included in there we never got to playing because we just enjoyed the base stuff so much and we wanted to keep working on that. But yeah, a really clear reference for the extensions, really clear reference for pretty much everything in the game. It's an easier game to play and learn than it is to learn out of the rulebook. It was, a little bit of a struggle to learn out of the rulebook, and after the first play, which admittedly was at 1:30 in the morning on the second day of Geekway.
Let's maybe not fault the rulebook for being hard to learn from entirely.
Yeah, it was decent to reference. I just kind of got to say, there's many, many rulebooks in the world, and this was definitely one of them.
Okay, we learned the game, didn't we?
Yes, we did. And I gotta say, this is a game that the more and more we played it, the more I really got the snappy feel of the way that everything works together on this, and really started to come to enjoy the way that the game plays and the way that you've really got to balance your engine between the engine building and the engine running. And that's always the truth of an engine building or even a deck building kind of game, is that you've got to find that pivot point. And it was weird to me how, depending on what particular starting token I had, everybody gets a specific starting tile, and that tile gives you basically an extension and also a set of 3 or 4 starting resource tiles. And I felt like after 6 plays, depending on which one I started with, it informed what locations I was going to be going to the most frequently, which really changed the way I need to think about my engine building versus executing. And that was something that came to a head in this very last game, that I just, could not at all get my engine going. And I just was sitting there with a whole crap ton of tokens that didn't really do a whole lot for me.
I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that not every resource is readily available on your base action spaces, which is actually something I enjoyed. If you wanted some of those rarer resources, you had to make sure that you set yourself up to be in a space to buy an extension from the extension board to be able to get that resource. And the ones that were not readily available and more valuable, because there certainly are resources which are more valuable in this game, were a lot harder to come by. There were fewer extensions, and if you weren't in a position to take advantage of that extension when it was available to you on the central board, maybe even having to pay a higher price to not wait for it to move down and perhaps be taken by someone else, then you really were going to be at a disadvantage. So you needed to make sure you were taking every opportunity to be prepared for the way you wanted to run your engine right from the jump.
I think that's what threw me off so much in this last game, is that I started with roughly the same kind of stuff that you did. I had a stacked stones, I had a food, I had one other item, and I needed to either get more stacked stones or wood to go after the two main actions that you went at. But my particular starting tile was active in, I forget which region, but whatever it was in a region that kind of made it inefficient for me to go to the space that would get me more of the things that I kind of should have gotten early on. And I guess it's obviously my fault that I didn't make, the priority of that particular goods and getting those extra goods. But if you are not prepared to really execute your strategy and adapt depending on which tile you've chosen or, ended up with if you do it randomly, then you can really kind of get a few rounds behind and find that another player's gotten a whole bunch of stuff.
One of the things I think it took us a few games to be really firmly aware of, but now I would not even consider not taking into account, is that there are certain resources which you need at least one or two of. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you're not discarding resources when you use them means that if you take the time to get one or two of them, you're going to have them throughout the whole game, assuming you don't put them on a contract and ship them overseas or stuff them in your warehouse somewhere where they don't belong.
Yeah.
As long as you are sort of proactive early in the game and get one or two stacked stones and one or two wood, you're going to have that throughout the game. And then you can go on with the strategy which is laid out for you by your start tile, because the start tiles not only determine what you're going to start with, but they give you an extra benefit, an action space that you have that nobody else has. So if you've been given tokens that go along with that action space because they are all pre-printed, you have a way to go that is going to be easier for you than it is for anybody else. Mm-hmm. So as long as you take a few turns early on to get those mandatory resources in order to just run your engine, sort of the oil of the engine, you can make whatever kind of car your action tile has laid out for you.
Yeah.
As long as you have the stuff to keep it going. And I think that's the balance of the early game, getting the really important but maybe not specific to you resources, and then using those to push forward your specified route.
I found it really interesting that over the 6 games, and starting with, probably 4 or 5 of the different starting tiles, I did have significant differences in my engine. I had, 1 or 2 games where I barely touched the boats. I had a game where I bought a whole bunch of boats. I got a game where I didn't buy any houses, or a game where I leaned heavily on the houses. I know you had 1 or 2 games where you didn't buy any more carts at all, which was just astounding to me. And I had games where I had all my extensions kind of on the left side of my board because there were particularly those regions. Or maybe I was only getting my extensions for the road and the mountain area. So having that starting setup, and then kind of, depending on the player count and the way that it's shaking out for where the locations were, it really does give you a good bit of variability depending on what your starting setup is. And I was really impressed at how different the game felt from game to game based on that one starting tile change. The action spaces themselves, I feel like we can go a little deeper into them now. There's the alpaca fields, like I said, that produce different alpaca-based goods. You have a mountain that allows you to get different kinds of rocks. I mean, really. You have the forest that allows you to get wood, and then once you are able to luck into cacao, you can then trade cacao for some of the fancier goods like a glass pitcher or a nice blanket. And those are kind of your production areas. You have a ocean space up in the corner that allows you to manipulate fish in certain ways to get different kinds of things.
That's a weird sentence.
Very true. You get to trade fish for different kinds of things, and that's also where you go to spend 2 wood to build a boat, and I guess that means you go somewhere and you get a resource of your choice? I don't know.
I guess so.
But then you have the kind of 3 other spaces that are the more mechanical engine building spaces. We talked briefly about the road. When you go down to the road and you spend a wood and a stacked stone over there, you get to increase your marker that tells you how many tiles you're going to be drawing out of your bag. There's also spaces on there that give you a square corn tile that has to go directly into your warehouse, and it kind of acts as a wild and a place filler for you to complete those rows more efficiently. We also have the house up in the top center of your action board, and at the house, that's where you're going to be moving things into your warehouse and also spending stacked stone to build the house cards that give you bonuses per specific, type of goods. You get an extra point for each of those. You also have the market over on the side, which is where you're going to be selling your goods for coins and then using those coins to purchase the contract cards or those extension tiles that kind of amplify what you're doing. I was also kind of surprised and I think this is most evident in the last two games we played, how the placement of stuff in the circle of locations actually did kind of have an impact on how I progressed through the game, depending on if I was going on a really heavy contract type of strategy and it was right next to the road. Those two things being next to each other really helped me get more tiles onto my board faster, and I didn't have to buy a cart because I could just spend the one food to trudge my way over to the road. And that was a nice little surprise that I didn't expect to having that location actually have an impact on early game.
Yeah, there are definitely games where I wanted to be able to do things in a certain order, and that also impacted how willing I was to buy carts, because if you are able to do any of your actions in whatever order is most available to you, then you have a little bit more freedom in your movement. You can spend one food to trudge to the tile next to you, and then spend your cart to move around the circle. Whereas if you need to go to that action tile, which is on the far side first, before you have the option to go to the place that's right next to where you are now because you want to end on that place, then you're going to be forced to purchase those carts a little bit more because you're going to have to use a second cart to get back to where you started. How many steps are in the running of your engine is going to greatly impact whether or not you need to get additional carts.
Yeah, very true. I also found the game sneakily interactive in a few very specific ways.
Agreed.
One of those, all of the resource tiles are limited by a specific player count. Depending on how many players you are, you may have, more or less resources. And there will become a time late in the game where all of the glass pitchers are gone because they are the most valuable ones. And you're also going to find that you need to go and get, I need a piece of wood, but oh crap, all of the pieces of wood are gone. I can no longer do this thing. So being really, really aware of what other players' engines are producing, especially in those kind of non-useful goods like the pitchers or things like that, but also those absolutely critical ones like the wood or the stacked stones, you've got to be really, really be aware of other players there.
There's also interaction in the decks of cards because the house and boat cards, the house cards are the ones that allow you to get an extra point per every type of good of a certain resource, and the boat cards are the ones that allow you to get a single resource of a given type. There's only one of each of them, and there's one for everyone in the game. So if I'm counting on going to the fish area to buy the boat to get my one cacao bean so I can keep processing that cacao bean to get very valuable resources because I missed the extension, and the player to my left goes to the boat area and buys that cacao boat, well, I'm not going to be able to do that. And whatever I had planned on doing with that cacao bean, unless I get an extension, I'm not going to be able to do it, and my strategy is going to be reworked.
Yeah.
Also in the house cards, if you are set up to buy house cards, it is very easy to do it multiple times in a row. Especially because if you end on that space that allows you to buy house cards, that means you start there the next round, and there's no reason not to just, if you have the resources come out again, buy another one. I know there were certain games where a house card was bought not because the player who bought it needed that particular house card, but because they're worth 4 points at the end of the game, whether you have any of that resource at all.
Yep.
And because they didn't want, I know in one game I bought the glass pitcher house card having no pitchers and the pitchers already being gone because another player had 7 of them. And I was like, I'm not letting them get an extra 7 points plus the 4 for the thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that, I'll get my 4 points and go on my merry way. No problem for one action.
Yeah, and that was something that definitely took a few plays to figure out. I really remember in our first few games, bought almost no boats, bought almost none of the houses, but by the end of these last 2 games, every single house and boat card was gone, because, like I said, that's just free points, especially with those houses. In this very last game, for example, some player who will remain unnamed, it was you, ended up getting all 10 of the house cards because I did not have a way to get a second stacked stone. Yeah, that did not go very smoothly.
And the thing is, you did have a way to get a second stack stone. There's always a way to get a second stack stone. It costs 2 food, and food is sort of a very plentiful resource that runs everything but is worth nothing at the end of the game. So there was always a way to get that second stack stone, but it would have involved you spending a cart to get over to the forest where you do that, or the mountain, I think, where you do that, and then a cart to get back, or a trudge food to get back to wherever you needed to be. And it would have really put a stall in your engine.
Yeah.
It was something that would have had to have been done earlier, because I was already just rolling along on it by the time you got to that point.
Yeah.
The other time we realized that there was a good amount of player interaction was with those contract cards. Mm-hmm. The contract cards, you can only have one of active at a time, and there's no way to discard them. So if you have taken a contract card, which requires 3 items, and you only have 2 of those items, and the third item is completely gone, they're already in other players' baskets or bags or whatever, you're not scoring any contract cards this game.
Yep.
That's something you realized in our first game.
Oh boy, I'm glad I learned that one early.
And have been very clear to tell everyone when we're teaching them, because you can really deprive yourself of a huge vein of points, because those contract cards are at least 9 points, and at most I think like
19
20
is the biggest.
something.
19 is the biggest one that I remember.
I think there's a 21.
Ooh.
But they're huge chunks of points. In a game where your score is probably going to be somewhere between 60 and 180, which is a very broad spectrum, but it covers the gamut of scores we've seen. If you're looking at around 100 points, let's say, getting 19 points from one place is a huge point get. So if you're going to stall out your entire contract thing because you didn't realize that there are no more blankets left and you have none, that is a point of player interaction that can be sort of problematic to your game.
Mm-hmm. I also feel like I'm just getting more efficient at this game the more I play it. We talked earlier, and kind of as the episode's gone on, about the warehouse board, which has, I think, 10 total rows that you can fill up, and once you get into the top half, whatever number it is, once you get into the top half, you start getting points. What I didn't really mention is the way that they score. When the row is filled up, you will score points at the end of the game, but depending on how high the row is, you're going to get a lot more points. I think the first one is 2, and then it's like 3, 4, 5, but once you get onto that other side, the very top row is worth 20 points, and it's not like you just get 20 points from your warehouse. You get the points for every row you've completed. And in the last 2 games, I was really able to take advantage of that warehouse and, start getting stuff up in those higher points. And I've had, I think, 2 games now where I've completed my 20-point row because I just had, a bunch of empty one-item rows to just make my way up to that top row a little bit faster. And that felt really cool to suddenly find a way to make that work. Something that in games 2 or 3, we were barely getting, 1 or 2 rows full of stuff in our warehouse. And here I am, a bunch of games later, getting more efficient and more effective at getting those tokens into that warehouse. It just felt really good to feel progression in the game.
The trade-off there, of course, is that you had to go get a lot of individual one-offs of separate resources that may not have worked together or may not have worked with anything else you were doing. So you were banking on the fact that you were going to get that warehouse completed, and then you'd get a bunch of that top row. I think it's 4 of that top row. But the things that you were getting might not have worked together at all.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in the same game, if we're talking about the last game we were playing, I think I only had 4 different types of resources the whole game because I was just using the same engine over and over again to gain things that I was already getting additional points for from houses and progress in the same style of engine until the end game where I just turned everything into high point value bracelets. Mm-hmm. It is definitely a trade-off, and you need to fully commit to the strategy you're using. Otherwise, if you sort of go in half-heartedly, you're going to cost yourself a ton of points.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about something that I have heard a lot of conversation about, and that's the game's play length. We played a 2-player game in 45 minutes earlier today.
That's true.
So I really feel like this is a game that the play length is going to optimize very heavily the more times you play this game. Some of our early games were way above that 2-hour area.
Yes, and that largely depends on how familiar everybody is with the game. It depends on your play count, because I can't see a 4 or 5 player game of this being under 2 hours really at all. I can't see that happening. We did play a 5-player game that was just over 2 hours.
Yeah.
But everybody in that game was either incredibly efficient or incredibly not paying attention. So the turns went quickly because you were either really invested or not invested at all. So it progressed pretty quickly. That being said, I wouldn't regularly want to play this with 5 because there is the potential for somebody who either isn't aware of how they want their engine to work or is just maybe an AP person to really drag this out. And if you've got 2 of them, this is going to be a 3-hour long game at least.
Yeah.
which it shouldn't be.
Yeah. With 3 players, we got this done in an hour and 15 minutes. And I just felt that felt great. This is a game that had a meaty engine build to it and, a lot of really cool decisions, stuff like that. And we're able to play it 3 or 4 players in that 90-ish minutes range. And that, I think when we played 3 players yesterday, that was including, teardown and scoring as well.
Yeah, but that was 3 people who had played the game before and were comfortable with it and had, frankly, spent quite a bit of time discussing the game and its strategies.
Very true. I guess the other question to talk about is replayability. I feel like there's enough different stuff, depending on the way that you set it up, that you get a good bit of variability out of this game each time you play it.
I have a feeling that after you play it a good number of times, there are going to be strategies that emerge as being strong strategies, and a good number of them as well. You can either go the house route, or you can go the warehousing route, or you can try to go a strong contract route. And there are going to be a few different things that okay, once I commit to this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the game. And that might hurt replayability for some people. If once you get your engine rolling, okay, this is the way I'm going to go. Unless there is a lot of player interaction in your game, that's probably what you're going to be doing. I personally think it's still fun to do that, to make sure that I am getting the resources I need and drawing them out in a way that's useful to me. And because that random draw is going to change the way you have to do things from time to time, you are going to need to make a tactical decision because you needed to draw 1 token and it was the one that stayed in the bag. But I don't think this is going to feel the same every time you play it, unless you play it 40 times.
All right, so let's talk about the big Orleans in the room. I think it's a good time for that.
Sure.
Altiplano is kind of thought of as a successor to Rainer Stockhausen's previous bag-building game, Orleans, which Tasty Minstrel Games did their first deluxeified edition of when that was kickstarted a few years ago.
Yes.
And people rave about Orleans. And I've played Orleans a number of times. We have it. I have both expansions, and I haven't touched the expansions yet. So obviously, that's where we're coming at from the conversation about Orleans. I like Orleans well enough. I think it presents a good bit of bag building. You get to do that engine building kind of stuff. But I found a lot more that I enjoyed in Altiplano.
I'd like to just start out and say we do not have the deluxeified copy of Orleans, so a lot of the component comparison that has been going on, people say, oh, the deluxeified Orleans has the wooden discs and this. We have cardboard chits in our Orleans, so we're comparing them, and they're fairly comparable component-wise. I'm not a huge fan of Orleans. I don't know why. Something about it doesn't click. I think it's largely the board component, where you're moving around, placing trading posts and collecting goods that don't really do anything for you.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy about that part, and it's always the part I don't want to do, so I don't do it, and by the time I get around to doing it, it's well too late to have done so.
Yeah.
I guess in the similar way we were talking about with Altiplano earlier, where you need to get those base goods into your system, except it's a much larger part of Orleans. That never really clicked for me. I agree. I have a lot more fun playing Altiplano.
Another thing I was just thinking about, and this comes back to our discussion about the art, I'm going to go out and say it. Orleans is really drab. I don't enjoy looking at Orleans. The box cover is nice.
Yes.
But the player boards, the main board, is really, really drab.
And
it's not exciting.
The chits are little full-size figure drawings on these very small chits, so they don't really have much character to them. Mm-hmm. Whereas, at least in Altiplano, you have the fun little alpaca face with his little clover sticking out of his mouth, or you have, a nice picture of
the
fish or the silver blanket. It's not trivializing the icon that's on the chit, which I feel like a lot of times those full character things do.
Now, a lot of people also say that Orleans is one of those games that, you've got to play it with the expansion. It adds so much. And honestly, that possibly is true. We have the expansions. I'm looking to play them at some point. And I actually, I took Orleans on the road with me for, a work trip, and I threw in the things that I needed for the solo missions. But I just, every time I looked at it and thought about setting it up, I was just like, well, this is just work. It looks like work. And that kind of bugs me about Orleans, I guess. I don't know. That's how I feel about it.
I think the other mechanical distinction that I want to at least bring up is that in Orleans, you're not necessarily guaranteed to draw everything out of your bag before you start adding stuff back into it. Mm-hmm. In Altiplano, it works like a deck builder. You're going to pull everything out, and then once you've used it, you're going to discard it into that bin, and then the bin will be dumped in only when the bag is empty. And I like that. I like knowing that I'm going to actually get to see everything that I've thrown in there, because it's always going to be cycled back in. I think that is a little bit more conducive to forming a strategy as opposed to wishing at a bag.
Yeah, you have a lot more options for different kinds of goods interactions in Altiplano. And knowing at any given time, all right, I'm going to draw these 4 tiles out of the bag so I can set myself up on this turn for an effective turn next turn with knowing that I'm going to get those things in addition to whatever else I get. I got to agree, and that's the kind of thing that I didn't really think about until we were a few games into Altiplano, and I'm thinking, all right, well, this is a really important information for any kind of bag builder or deck builder, the ability to control what you've got coming through your bag, and knowing that to inform your strategy allows you to think deeper about your strategy than, man, I really hope that I pull a monk out so I can take advantage of this action, and then you pull out your stuff and it's all farmers, and you're like, well, I guess I don't really get to do this thing this turn. So Altiplano to me feels like I'm building more of a long-term strategy with my engine, while early on, there are good things about it, and I like, the place tiles, you can get basically your extensions, same kind of thing, but I like to know that I'm going to be able to use my engine the way I built my engine.
Just to quickly touch on the value of these games, they are about $5 different in price for the base game at the online retailer at which I was looking. Not MSRP, but the sort of the actual cost that you would pay. Orleans is about $40. Altiplano is $45. If you were to get that Trade and Intrigue expansion, which is often talked up for Orleans, that is another $15. So you're still about $10 different, but not a huge amount of money. Altiplano is $45. I don't remember if I said that. So you're $45 for Altiplano, $40 for Orleans, plus another $15.
I also would not be surprised if we see an Altiplano expansion somewhere in the future, so just be aware. Like, I don't see why you wouldn't expand this game. It's just adding more tokens, and people like tokens and new things.
I'm not entirely sure I need an I'm not entirely sure I need an Altiplano expansion if one comes out, but I'd have to see what mechanics they added.
All right, so final thoughts. Personally, I'm keeping Altiplano in the collection. I really enjoy the game. I enjoy the way that the engine functions. I enjoy coming up with a new way to build that engine depending on what my starting situation is. There are a few component issues that aren't really significant enough to worry about, and it's easy enough to go and buy a cloth bag here or there if I really wanted to. But
or some broccoli.
The engine is satisfying, and I love the way that it feels. And now that we've gotten a few plays of it in, knowing that 3 of us can get a play done in less than an hour and a half makes this a shoo-in for a game that I want to be bringing out more regularly. Danielle, what do you think?
I'm really enjoying this, and I'm glad that you are in the same boat, that you want to keep this game, because it is, at this point for us, just that right thinky but not heavy Euro that we can pull out and play. If we have 5 and we need to seat 5, we can do it. It'll take longer, but a lot of Euros don't give you that option. It has really interesting strategy, and it takes some planning, but once you get going, I feel like it runs really smoothly if you know what you're doing. I enjoy the look of it. I enjoy the way it feels. Everything about this game really hit in the right spot for me. I'm not saying that this is going to be my favorite game of all time. Like that, this is not my new best game. But it is a really enjoyable, really fun game, and I'm glad that we took the chance to learn it.
Cool. Well, that is Altiplano. We'll take a quick break and come back with some beer pairings, because Altiplano is on tap next. For more information on the beers we chose to pair with today's game on tap, check out the show notes section at our website, draftmechanic.net. So in case somehow you forgot in the last 10 seconds, we are putting Altiplano on tap, the 2017 release from DLP Games and Renegade Games Studios, designed by Rainer Stockhausen. Danielle, you want to lead us off with the first beer of de jour?
Sure. First, from Shebeen Brewing Company in Walcott, Connecticut, we have Alpaca-farming. This is a New England IPA that clocks in at 6.6% ABV and 60 IBU. It's brewed with Azacca and Mosaic hops, which give it a fruity flavor, but it's also got some floral notes. And the website says it is Danka, but I have a feeling they mean dank, not thank you.
This beer thanks you for drinking it.
But in German. This is available on tap or in cans, so if you are in the Connecticut area, you should be able to find it packaged.
Next up, from Left Barrel Brewing in Balhana, South Australia, on the continent and country of Australia, we have Alpaca Amber. This is a farmhouse amber ale that clocks in at 5.3% ABV, 35 IBU. This is an amber ale featuring farmhouse yeast and hopped later to balance the sweet maltiness of this amber. It's on draft largely in the Adelaide area and also available in bottles.
We have from Swiftwater Brewing Company in Rochester, New York, Alpaca Kisses,
Aww.
which is, it's an adorable name, and the little logo is also very, very cute.
Oh, that mouth is so big, though. No.
Don't actually
Move
kiss
on,
an
move
alpaca.
on. Please move on.
This is also a New England IPA. It is 6.5% ABV, and this one is brewed with Vic Secret and Denali hops. It has notes of blueberry and Fruit Loops, according to their website. The blueberry I understand, because a lot of hops do have that fruity blueberry note, but Fruit Loops is a new descriptor for me, and it is available on draft and in growlers at the brewery.
Number 4 on the list, from White Oak Brewing in Normal, Illinois, we have Mayama Llama. It's an English mild ale. 4% ABV, 20 IBUs. This is a mild ale inspired by collaborator Coffee Hound's Mexican mocha latte with vanilla, cinnamon, cocoa, and coffee flavors. That is really exciting. All right, this has rotating availability on draft, and you can get it in a 22-ounce bomber. I am going to look for that.
I had to put this one on because Mayama Llama is Call Me Llama, and we definitely called that alpaca llama many, many times.
Just following instructions, sir.
Finally, from Proclamation Ale Company in Warwick, Rhode Island, we have a series, which is actually their Alpaca Magi series.
Nice.
This is a series of sour ales that are blended with dark fruit, and they are released in 750 milliliter bottles. So far, they have had, 5 releases, which are fabulously named. They are The Dark Night of the Alpaca Magi, which is a blonde sour fermented with wild yeast on raspberries, blended with a funky dark sour. The Infinite Ascension of the Alpaca Magi, a blonde sour fermented in oak barrels with raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, and cherries. The Amazing Adventures of the Alpaca Magi, which is a golden sour fermented in oak barrels with raspberries and wild yeast. The Unyielding Wrath of the Alpaca Magi, a sour ale fermented in oak barrels with dark tart cherries, plums, and black currants. And most recently, The Eternal Void of the Alpaca Magi, a dark sour fermented in oak with dark tart cherries, plums, black currants, and raspberries. These were all very limited releases when they were put out, but I had sent a message to Proclamation Ale Company because they're starting up a new sours program, and before I recommended these delicious-sounding Alpaca Magi beers, I wanted to make sure that they were going to be producing them from their new program. And what they actually told me was their new Oakville, if you were looking up their sours program, it is now called the Oakville Sours Program. That is actually the name of their sours room, and they are going to be likely revisiting some of these old releases as well as introducing new Alpaca Magi releases. So I'm really excited to see some of these come back, and you may have the opportunity to feel the unyielding wrath of the Alpaca Magi in the future. They were also really super responsive, which I just want to point out because I really appreciate it when people are helpful and don't think I'm asking them weird questions for nefarious reasons. So if you are in the Warwick, Rhode Island area, I would highly recommend to check out the Sours program from Proclamation Ale Company. It all sounds delicious.
Yes, if you are that listener from Rhode Island, drop us a line and let us know about this stuff because that sounds super freaking cool. Cool. All right, well, there will be information on all those beers and where you can find them up on the website, draftmechanic.net. Click the show notes tab and do the thing you do on the internet, which is read information and click links. Yes. Well, let's talk about sours, though. It makes me think, Danielle, have we ever really talked about sour beer particularly on the show before?
Like I said in the introduction, we have a little bit when we talked about the different bugs that actually make sour beer sour. But listener Megan Naxer had actually, in our Slack channel, asked if we would do a discussion about the different styles of sour beer, because like every other kind of beer, you've got different styles of sour beer. It's not just sour. Well, some of it is, but we'll get back to that at the end. There are 3 main groups of sour styles, and they are broken down into 6 main styles. 3 of them are Belgian styles of sour beer. The first of these is alembic, which is brewed with ambient yeast, which is added to the beer by cooling it in something that's called a coolship. This is a really shallow pan, which is a wide surface area that allows the beer to cool down quicker than it would if you left it in the kettle or something like that. But it was used before they had quick chilling, before there was refrigeration or sort of a blast chiller system that they could set up. And they would just leave the beer out in these flat pans in the open air, and it would get the ambient yeast in it, and then they would age it in barrels or casks or whatever. This is where lambics came from. They're often aged in oak, and a lot of times there is a fruit added, and when you add specific fruits, you will get styles that you may have heard of. So a kriek, K-R-I-E-K, kriek, is a lambic that has had cherries added to it before it is aged. Or a framboise is a lambic that's had raspberries added to it. You can also take different ages of lambic and blend them to create different styles of beer. So if you take a young lambic, maybe 1 year or less, and blend it with a 2 to 3 year old lambic that's been aged in that oak for a long time, what you're going to get is a gueuze. G-U-E-Z-E. That spelling will become important in a minute. So if you've ever seen something like Gueuze Tilken, that is a mix of 2 different ages of lambic. The second Belgian style is an Oud Bruin. This is a brown ale that's aged in oak for up to 2 years to develop a complex sourness once it's got that wild yeast in it. This includes a note of maltiness because you start with that brown ale, which is going to be maltier than something else like a Flanders Red that I'll get to in a minute. This was traditionally from the East Flanders region and is, like I said, it's a little bit maltier, but it is still that really complex flavor. The third and final Belgian style is the Flanders Red Ale. This is brewed with specialty malts that give it a really rich red color. It does not have fruit to give it that red color, which is a little bit surprising because this is often compared to like the red wine of sour beer. It has a really strong fruit flavor palette and a lot of depth of flavor and a tannic presence to it. This is aged in oak that is inoculated with lactobacillus and other bacteria. And older batches are blended with younger batches, again, like we saw in the lambics, to give it balance. It shouldn't have hop flavor, but there is a little bit of hop bitterness, but a very low level. Again, like I said, the tannic style is more what's going to give you the bitterness. This originated from West Flanders, and if you have had a chance to try one of these, they are really, really good, and I highly recommend them. Moving on from the Belgian styles, we have 2 styles that are German in origin. We have the Gose, G-O-S-E, as opposed to the goose from before. Told you that spelling would come in handy. And this is an unfiltered German-style wheat beer. At least half of the grain bill is going to be wheat here. And it is brewed with coriander and salt added during the brewing process. Traditionally, this would have been spontaneously fermented, but you can add a combination of top fermenting ale and lactobacillus and pitch that into your wort in order to do this without having to take that ambient yeast in.
Okay.
To create a little bit more controlled style of brewing. But Gose always has that coriander and salt flavor, and a lot of times you'll get them and they'll be really, really salty, which may not necessarily be everybody's cup of tea. The second style of German-style sour is a Berliner Weisse, which is unsurprisingly from the Berlin area. This is also a wheat beer, but you may have a lower percentage of wheat than you did in the Gose, where it's going to be 50% wheat. It will have lactobacillus and Brettanomyces, which are going to be the bugs that create the sourness, but it shouldn't have an overly funky character from that Brettanomyces. It's important to have as an ingredient, but you don't want it to be like a super funky bread. You want it to sort of be mainly that lactic acid flavor. This is going to be low in alcohol, maybe 3 or 4% alcohol, but it is going to be high in carbonation. And when these were traditionally served, they were accompanied by a fruit syrup that made up for the really sour flavor that you got from all the bugs that made it a sour beer. This makes sense because a lot of times now you'll see a fruit-flavored Berliner Weisse, and that's just taking that syrup that was added and brewing it into the beer process.
It's funny because we have a local brewery here in Charlotte, Legion, that has Carolina Sparkle Party, which is their house Berliner Weisse, and they offer it dressed with different fruit-flavored syrups. And I always kind of, I just assumed that was just a gimmick that they were doing, but they're actually more traditional about it than all of the fruit-flavored Berliner Weisses then.
Yeah, that's how it would have originally been done.
Huh. Good job, Legion.
having talked about those German styles, we have to talk about the process that is called kettle souring, because these are the two styles that are generally being brewed when you talk about a beer being kettle soured. When you make any of those Belgian styles that I talked about earlier, or if you were to make something in the traditional fashion, you're going to let the sourness develop over a long period of aging, and it'll give you a very specifically complex flavor because the sourness is developing over a long period of time. Now that has a bunch of, not problems, but sort of costs in order to do that. Kettle souring is a different way of producing a sour, where you create your wort with boiling all your mash and everything, and you inoculate it either with just straight bacteria, or you can actually, I was reading somewhere that people actually throw yogurt in to get that culture going, but you add the culture in while it is still in the brew kettle, and you allow the sourness to develop. But then once it's at the level of sourness that you want, you boil the wort to kill those bacteria, which stops the souring. It won't continue to get more sour like a traditional sour would. And you then allow it to ferment after it's been boiled again. This does a couple of things. One, it makes the beer technically clean, so you can age it in a place where you're fermenting non-sour beer and you don't have to worry about contamination. It also allows you to be very careful about the level of sour that you get and not have to worry about any kind of stock getting more sour as it sits on a shelf. The downside to kettle souring, however, is that you don't get anywhere near the same complexity of sour flavors that you would if you had aged a beer for 3 years and developed that sort of wine-like Flanders red. So a lot of times kettle-soured beers are considered a little bit more one-note. The sourness is just sour. It's not tart or funky. At the same time, it allows breweries that don't necessarily have dedicated sour spaces or dedicated sour programs to produce something that they may be interested in trying, or to produce a sour beer that has a very clean sourness to it. A lot of these German-style sours are considered summer beers because they are refreshing in the same way that like a lemonade would be refreshing, and you may not necessarily want that funky complexity if you want a 3% beer that you're going to drink because it's hot and you want something that's refreshing. So if you see something that's a kettle sour, that's not going to be a style, that's going to be a process, and what you're getting is a controlled sour that is then clean before fermentation. The final style of sour beer that I found in most of the places I was looking up was the American-style sour ale. And this is really, it doesn't mean anything other than it's made in America. What it generally means is it doesn't have to be any of those other 5 traditional styles. Often, American-style sour ales are inspired by the traditional styles of beer, but you can mix methods and really do whatever you want to create the funkiness. You can add a bunch of Brett into your beer to get a really super funky flavor, or you cannot. You should still end up with a balanced product that doesn't have off flavors created by adding the wrong bacteria in it, because that's just how you make good beer. But there's really no telling what the bottle of American sour that's sitting in your beer closet really is. One of the styles that is often referenced is the Kentucky Common, which is a style of American sour ale that is particularly tart, in my experience. But again, if you see something that is an American style ale, all that means is it is not produced in one of those traditional Belgian or German styles. So those are the main types of sour beer. If you are out trying to expand your sour palate, or if you already know that those are a type of beer that appeals to you, I hope you now know a little bit more about what it means when you see any of those different demarcations on a style of beer. And with the weather heating up around here, I know we're going to keep a bunch of those in our fridge for the next couple of months. That being said, my show beer tonight is a Goza with hibiscus added, so it's got that nice tart flavor, but also a fruitiness to it, and it is very refreshing. It is the Grayton Beer 30A Rosé, if you are interested in the North Florida area, the Panhandle area. That is all I have for sours, but on the other side of the bump, we have a final round topic that I'm kind of interested in hearing the answers to. Please do not feed, touch, poke, prod, tease, pester, annoy, torment, worry, irk, harass, disturb, bother, or ruffle the draftmechanic.net. I mean, the animals.
In our final round today, we asked our Slack channel, Are choose-your-own-adventure books and stories considered games? At what point does a story become a game? Is it the choices, is it the mechanics, or is it something else? Now, big thanks to Slack member Matt Popiella for the topic idea on this episode. And it worked out really well, obviously, because I wanted to talk about those choose-your-own-adventure book games. Yeah. So first up, Crystal Pisano from Board Game Blitz said, the books themselves? No, I consider them more of an activity than a game. I think that when you add in other mechanics that exist outside of the decision-making process that affect the decision-making process, that's when it becomes more of a game. Building a character, choosing stats, acquiring items that unlock other options, etc. Legacy of Dragonholt is my touchstone for my references, as I haven't played the new Choose-Your-Own-Adventure game yet.
Eric Buscemi from Cardboard Horde added, Captive and other books coming from Van Ryder fit Crystal's definition as well, which I agree with. In those books, you build a character with stats and hit points, and in addition to the choices of which page to flip to, you can pick up and interact with items, weapons, keys, trinkets, etc. It adds layers beyond just the branching paths, which feels like a random tree to parse. For example, in the stats, you can pump strength instead of stealth, and then when you play, you know you should try to be fighting instead of sneaking.
John Tyler also chimed in and also agrees with Crystal's assessment. Just reading a story and making choices is more of an activity. It becomes a game when you add in other mechanics, such as character building or dynamic choices based on outside variables, for example, dice rolling.
Brendan Kemp added, an activity that one engages in for fun? That's pretty much the definition of a game. A game usually has rules, it has conflict of some sort, and it has an outcome, either a win against an opponent or solving a puzzle. Whenever I hear the, is it really a game argument, the above is what I go with. So yes, these new Choose-Your-Own-Adventure books are games, in my opinion, far more than the original Choose-Your-Own-Adventure books of old that we read in grade school. These new ones are more like puzzles we are attempting to solve for the best possible outcome.
So I actually chimed in on this one as well. I always refer back to a discussion that I heard on the first episode of Ludology where Gil Hova had joined the crew there, and they discussed what makes a game. One thing that they honed in on, that's something that stuck with me a lot, is that a game must have a loss condition to be a game. Not specifically a way to win, but specifically a way that you lose. And in that case, a Choose-Your-Own-Adventure book would qualify, right? Because you're going through the book, and there are definitely paths in the book that say you have lost, or you've died, or you failed, something like that. And I feel like once you add in that loss condition, that does make that a game, by that definition.
Crystal chimed back in. Yeah, based on that definition, I'd say that's true. Some children's games don't have an endpoint, though. Duck Duck Goose keeps going until someone decides to stop playing. No one loses. Does that make it an activity instead of a game? Maybe. Defining a game is, in a lot of contexts, difficult. Abby and I got into it one day about the Mind because I said that it was less of a game than the other Spiel nominees. For what it's worth, I love the Mind a ton. I just don't think it should win the Spiel.
I feel like that is a conversation we are going to hear a lot, and Brandon from What Did You Play This Week chimed back in and said, I secretly hope the Mind wins the Spiel, just for the sheer fun that will be Board Game Geek, Twitter, and Reddit for the couple weeks after that announcement. I feel like we should also take a mention to one of our local game designer friends, Nate Bivens, who is actually working on a card-based version of what is kind of like a walking simulator kind of video game. If you look about games like Gone Home or What Remains of Edith Finch, these are interactive narrative stories that really exist to tell a specific message. And Nate is working on making a system that kind of does those things. And it really is, it's like a choose-your-own-adventure kind of deck of cards, but it does add in some mechanics that obviously we're not going to talk about because he's working on this thing, but it adds in some interesting mechanics. And I'm really interested to see that the video game walking simulator, which is really an updated version of the Choose Your Own Adventure book, is giving us the potential to make stories interactive. And hopefully we're going to see over the next few years that we're able to do that in an analog setting as well. So that's really cool. And maybe we'll have to redefine what the game is once again if we end up getting to a point where those things are becoming more common. So good luck to you, Nate. We're excited.
Indeed.
Well, if you would like to contribute into one of our discussions here for the final round, come and join our Slack channel. It's totally free, and we just talk about board games and beer. You can go to draftmechanic.net/Slack and sign up there. If you don't know what Slack is, it's basically a web service or an app on your phone that is chat rooms and stuff where you talk about stuff, and you can come hang out in our Slack channel, and we talk about all those things, and every now and then somebody posts a funny picture. because that's the internet.
Indeed.
But we're coming to the end of this episode. If you want to get more information on us, draftmechanic.net's the place to be. At draftmechanic on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram is the places. Draftmechanic@gmail.com if you really want to go there as well. Also an option.
We've also got a Board Game Geek Guild. That is guild number 2470. If you'd like to come hang out there, we have a thread up for this episode and every episode going back all the way to the beginning. So if you have an opinion on something we've said or just want to check the link for the show notes to get all those good beers for the On Tap, you can head over to Board Game Geek Guild.
Our next local game night here in Charlotte is on Thursday, June 7th at Good Road Cider Works. For more information on those, you can hit up our Facebook page, or you can also go to draftmechanic.net/events, which just has links that go to our Facebook page. But maybe you don't like searching for things on Facebook. I mean, who knows?
Draft Mechanic, as always, is sponsored by Grey Fox Games. Visit greyfoxgames.com to sign up for their newsletter for the latest. Grey Fox Games, quality games, cleverly crafted.
I think that's pretty much everything that I had planned to talk about on this episode, and we're almost at 2 hours. So, Danielle, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
As always, I would like to remind our listeners to please game responsibly and tell them that I'll see them back here in 2 weeks for another round.
Sounds good. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Draft Mechanic episode 76 was recorded on Sunday, June 3rd, 2018, in front of a live studio cat.
Beauty is in your eyes, you are the beholder. You render me stricken. Do not go gently into that gutter.
Finally, I've got herbaceous sprouts to talk to.
Yeah, talk to the sprouts.
Talk to the sprouts. If you would like to join in on one of our discussions for the final round or contribute?
Punchboard Media,
where we all bring something to the table.
Pull up a chair
at punchboardmedia.com.